Some rise by sin, and some by virtue fall. Thanks for that, Shakespeare, whoever you really were. And for that matter, let us ask the question, who is Joshua Stephenson? Joshua is the major character we follow throughout the short Sinnerman Questline, observing his journey unto a holy, pun intended, death. But of course, the righteous nature of his death is lost on many people of the cyberpunk world. He's basically a spectacle more than anything, a sideshow attraction for millions of viewers who will most likely just forget him within a week of viewing his commodified death. Just another murderer lost in the scream sheets. But is his story really that simple? Or does it say something more about the nature of cyberpunk storytelling? Is it less about the microcosm of Joshua, V, and even Johnny, and more about the world at large? I don't know the answer, but we're gonna talk about it today. Hello, my name is Liddy, and welcome to Shaped by Stories, where we unpack how characters shape stories, and how those stories shape us. Let's get into it. Joshua Stephenson was born sometime in the 2040s, and he's said to be a Haywood native. In his youth, he joined one of the minor gangs of the neighborhood. He may have even known Jackie Wells or Misty in his childhood, imagine that. A life of crime for the younger people of Night City isn't uncommon. For most people, joining a gang is one of the easiest, quote-unquote, ways to make some sort of living. It's a cutthroat world out there, not unlike ours in many ways, where most people just manage to eke out a living, but only just. In situations and environments like Night City, crime can feel like it's a person's only real option to survive. And it's possible this was the case for Joshua, or at least a part of it. The incident that would land Joshua Stephenson in prison took place outside a Haywood corner store, where he attempted an armed robbery and killed 2 civilians in the process, Caroline Jablonski and Ruben Elamar. He was convicted in 2065 and was put on death row. Joshua can say to V the following regarding his feelings, in the moment he pulled the trigger that day.
Why'd you shoot him?
I was holding a gun. I didn't like the way they looked at me, and I had the power to stop them. I still see their faces just before I... frozen in time. God, give me strength to never forget.
And yeah, that's pretty cold. He has the power to silence somebody, to take them out of the world, or the delusion that he has any right to. And that's sort of the standard in Night City. Might equals right in its battleground streets. But in prison, Josh did a thing that a number of famous criminals, and probably many who aren't famous, have done. Joshua found religion. But it wasn't an immediate dive into faith, as he says. It was built upon the letters of forgiveness sent to him by the devout Zuleika Elamar, the sister of Reuben, the man that he killed. She sent these letters after being encouraged to forgive by the head of her church. For Zuleika, she found great relief in forgiving Joshua, in sharing her faith with him. She actually goes so far to describe him as a brother, one that almost fills that void left by Reuben's murder. Which, I mean, to each their own, but damn. Brother gets killed, and his killer is the one who fills his shoes in a way for her. Like, good for her that she found that kind of forgiveness in her heart. Some people can forgive things like what Joshua did, and that is an extremely difficult and powerful thing to do. You gotta give that to her. To forgive someone who has terribly wronged you is a big weight off your shoulders. But the closeness to Joshua? Like, that's another level. As Joshua says, Zuleika's forgiveness was a huge thing for him. He says that in prison he had a lot of time to think about his actions, to recognize the gravity of what he'd done. This is a large part of what inspired his faith, or his quest for it, to seek forgiveness for his crimes. But Yeah, that's not so simple. Nor was it a path he walked quietly. The media picked up on his sudden conversion, and Joshua took to that 15 minutes of fame. He used every opportunity he could to spread the message of forgiveness, to explain his personal changes. He was sort of evangelizing, but also making his own voice heard in general. He wanted to kind of wake people up in a way, or so he says, which isn't super unlike Johnny Silverhand, though Johnny wasn't all about Jesus and whatnot. His explicit message was of a different sort. Eventually, Joshua made a deal with Fourth Wall Studios, a Braindance producer, to take over his 2077 execution. I'm not sure if it's the studio that proposed the idea, or if Joshua was the one who brainstormed it, but Joshua agreed to be crucified like his spiritual savior, where he could die in the BD, and every feeling leading up to that moment of his death would be recorded for entertainment. Definitely messed up, but it was a mutually enticing opportunity for both sides. The studio's goal was capitalize on Joshua's fame or infamy, whereas Joshua's goal was to spread his message. And the government, the law, wasn't going to stand in the way. After all, the NCPD and the Night City government are all in the pockets of corps, and some of the shareholders in those corps had ties to Fourth Wall. But Joshua needed, like any actor, a personal assistant. Enter V. A couple days before Joshua's scheduled debut on the Braindance scene, he's allowed to leave prison, but he's got to remain in the studio's custody. Under the protection of assigned NCPD officer Vasquez and the BD studio producer, Rachel Kasich, he's on his way to visit none other than Zuleika at her mother's house. But Joshua's brief stint of freedom isn't well received by everyone. Bill Jablonski wants revenge for the death of his wife, Caroline, and he gets in contact with Wakako Okada to make it happen. Wakako puts V on the case, and off V goes to meet Bill in Arroyo. Bill explains to V that he wants to be the one to flatline Joshua, to be there to watch the fear in his eyes in his final breaths. The loss of Caroline hit him incredibly hard, poor guy, and you can see how desperate he is to have something to replace that pain. With how badly his plan goes, it definitely feels like he didn't take a lot into account. He actually reminds me of Claire Russell in a way. He's seeing red, he wants blood, but the only blood that gets spilled in the end is Bill's. After a car chase with V as the driver, which, Bill, you picked the wrong mercenary for this kind of a quest. Bill rushes to the NCPD vehicle transporting Josh and gets executed by Vasquez in the blink of an eye, just like that. Rest in peace, Bill. You can actually find a niche for him and for his wife at the columbarium. Together again in death. Vasquez is about to gun V down on Rachel's orders when Joshua steps out of the car and requests that V joins them for the day. Vasquez can actually know of V's reputation and try to limit the amount of criminals in his vehicle to one, but V, should they choose to accept the invitation, comes along for a ride. Also, side note that I thought was quite funny, Vasquez is, like many enemies V faces, extremely verbally hostile to V. He likes to chirp, he talks a big game. Now, we're just used to V shredding through enemies and whatnot every time we encounter someone like this, but apparently, pre-2.0, Vasquez was a brick shithouse, but he's been nerfed now. I just thought that was really funny, because bro can back up his threats, or at least he used to be able to back up his threats. The other thing, too, is that Bill Jablonski totally underestimated the guard that Joshua would have. He even says, oh, they're just corpo rats. He wasn't expecting Vasquez. Joshua tells V he simply wants them to watch him throughout the day, to talk to him and keep him company in his final hours of life outside the studio, saying V will be compensated out of Fourth Wall's pockets. A confused V joins him at the Elamar residence, and the first thing we see in the house is the shrine of Reuben as we enter. A shrine caringly maintained even all these years after his murder. The Elamar residence has family photos all over the walls, showing the closeness of the family in better times. Ruben's room is actually still probably just the way he left it. You can see a bit of who he was. He had a boxing trophy, he had movie posters on the walls. I really like that this quest took the time to have those details there to just bring a little something extra to this character that we never meet. In the kitchen, Joshua finally puts his cards on the table, explaining the upcoming brain dance as well as what he hopes to achieve with it.
Zuleika and I have a running dispute. I was thinking you could help us resolve it.
No. I never agreed to anything like this. Joshua, he thinks he's the Messiah and wants to end his own life.
That is not true. I never said I was any sort of Messiah.
Suicide? Do you really think that's what the Lord could ever want from you?
It won't be suicide. What's wrong with using a platform to tell people about my faith and God's grace? This is much bigger than the laws of man. With this brain dance, I'll take God's message to billions. Zuleika transformed me into a child of God. It's time I repaid that debt. I want to bear witness to love's existence in a manner that all the lost souls on this wretched earth can understand.
Why love?
If unconditional love exists, then so must God. It's time the world was reminded of His divine presence. Think of the millions jacked into their feeds like livestock. The children growing up in gang-infested streets. Do they know love? Think of the joy toys on Jig Jig Street. Coked-out corpos in their offices, and murderers who stalk the streets. I want to reach them. I will reach them. And think of paid killers like you, V. Have you known love? Do you know what it is?
And it's... Joshua speaks of spreading the existence of unconditional love, but to most people, the way he's going about it, it's a really controversial, titillating, gory way to be entertained for a few minutes. For people to marvel at him and go, this guy's crazy. So a couple of interesting things are revealed here. First of all, he says, without Ruben's death, he never would have found his faith. And sure, I get what he means, but it's kind of a bad taste remark, in my opinion. I don't know, I just doubt Ruben would have been super thrilled about what happened to him and what happened to his family, knowing that because of that terrible decision of Joshua's, Joshua would find Jesus. I feel like that's not a huge consolation. But Joshua also reveals that Zuleika disagrees with his vision for the brain dance. In fact, he even says that he hopes V can help solve their dispute. And Zuleika is like, I didn't agree to A, having a stranger over for this discussion, which V still doesn't understand the whole nature of, and B, why are you trying to use this stranger to change my opinion? And yeah, it's Joshua, it's not nice to spring that kind of discussion on this spiritual sister of yours. And Josh has a bit of a habit of springing things on people, or at least a bit of one. We'll get to that in a minute. But Zuleika explains her own reasons for why she thinks Joshua, being executed in this Christ-like manner, is a horrible decision. For starters, this BD can be considered blasphemous to many Christians, likely Zuleika included, because of what it's depicting and the fact that it's being sold in BD form. But it's also just horrible on another level because people will be able to watch, to experience and feel this theatrical execution for their own curiosity, for their own entertainment. They can feel his pain and his agony. And as Zuleika says, Josh is kind of happy about that. He wants people to feel his pain. He thinks he's going to change hearts and minds, or at least will make a good attempt at doing so. But I think Zuleika's right. This is gonna be a way for a lot of people to get their own kind of messed up kick, like an XBD, and she doesn't want that to happen to Joshua, someone who she cares about. After Joshua's spirited sharing of his motives, Zuleika and Ruben's mother arrives, and she is not happy. And why would she be? The man who murdered her son is sitting uninvited in her kitchen with her only surviving child and my heavily armed V. Joshua tried to beg her for forgiveness, but Gloria Elamar isn't having it. She kicks Josh and V out while Zuleika tries to console her. Around the Elamar's house, as I said, there's those family photos, but there's another man in some of those photos, presumably Zuleika and Ruben's dad. For all we know, he could have passed away following his son's death, maybe even in part due to the stress of the loss. For Gloria to see that man in her kitchen, after who knows what she's been through in the last few years, that is a lot to spring on someone. And even for Zuleika to kind of facilitate this meeting, because that's what it seems like maybe she was trying to help her mother through encouraging her to forgive for her own sake, and I can totally understand that. But ultimately, it turns out to be a not great call here. In the car, Joshua is distraught. He says that he really thought, or at least he worked himself up to believe, that Gloria would forgive him before he goes to his death. V can say that they would have forgiven him in her shoes, or that, yeah, no, of course she wouldn't forgive him, you killed her kid. Either way, Joshua is bothered by this refusal of forgiveness, as to him, it's almost like he's being locked out of salvation in a way. But the most telling part of this whole ride is that Rachel and Vasquez couldn't care less about what Joshua is feeling, about what he wants. They both start talking about where they're gonna go get some food, that Paisley has good coffee, etc., etc. V can join them in this discussion. Ultimately, these two don't care about Joshua's personal struggles and his loneliness and his growing existential dread as death draws near. They both want him dead for different reasons. For Rachel, it's because money. This brain dance is gonna be her potential big break. But Vasquez, on a personal level, despises Joshua. He's only doing guard duty because he would rather not have corpo enemies, as Fourth Wall has a lot of corpo interests tied up in it that are likely also connected to NCPD. He's gonna do his job right and protect Joshua, but he sees Josh as just another criminal who sort of gets away. Joshua is going to die, yes, but he's dying in a way he's potentially happy about. He's had a few moments of fame. Vasquez is disturbed by the perversion of justice, as well as his role in protecting him, but guys gotta eat. Speaking of eating, at Pi Z, Rachel pulls V aside and tries to bribe them to leave, as she views V as a distraction for Joshua. She doesn't want any doubts seeping into her star, as that will negatively affect the profitability of the BD. If V takes that bribe, that's that. Questline is over. But V can say no and stick around for Joshua. Depending on what you say to Rachel in this conversation, she can reveal that she does think Joshua is mentally unstable. She's aware that he needs professional help, but it's no skin off her back. But she can also say this.
That seems nice. You know, for a murderer.
Nice. Maybe. But I'd go with completely lost and unhinged. Some people are only nice because they're afraid of getting hurt. Or because their religion tells them to be.
And I mean, while I think it's entirely up to the player whether or not this line applies to Joshua, I think it may. His obsession with forgiveness is entirely understandable given what's gonna happen to him. But his niceness, his gentleness, his politeness, it feels very fragile. At least to me. It's not that I think he's a crazy psychopath and all that, but I think he's terrified, and I think that's what motivates him more than anything. Not necessarily the idea of spreading the message of God's unconditional love. And I'm not trying to knock him for that either, because, yeah, I feel like most people would be absolutely terrified in his situation. But you're also remembering at the same time that that terror he felt is what his victims probably felt in those moments before he pulled the trigger. Inside Pi Z, we get a scene that, thank you Cyberpunk Wiki for pointing this out, has a lot of nods to the Last Supper. You got the long table, you have the, well, they're not apostles, but they're people, and I believe it's the same number in at least Leonardo's version of the Last Supper, that are sitting at this table in Cyberpunk. The other thing too is when Rachel gets up to do her end rant discussion, like the pose she takes also kind of resembles some people in the painting. And also, as the wiki says, V could be seen as a sort of Judas character in a way, considering what Rachel just tried to pull with them. But a Judas who doesn't sell out. Josh's name is also derived kind of from Jesus's name, so there's that too. V can attempt to get to know Josh the person here. We can learn that he has a specific version of the crucifixion that he wants the BD to follow. Rachel explains most of the inciting events of the BD will be recorded with a stand-in for Joshua, as they only really have enough time to film his execution. As Joshua fruitlessly tries to eat his meal with the never-disappearing fries and steak, he even admits that he too likes to use brain dances to unwind. Either way, it's an interesting short conversation, and it's short because Rachel loses her patience very quickly. She forces Joshua to say goodbye to V, leaving them in the restaurant with Johnny. Also, in this scene, Rachel can begrudgingly share that she meditates, which I like to see because for sure she's a corpo who is eager to get ahead, eager to get this guy executed so she can make her money, so she can get her bosses off her back too, probably. But she's also a complicated person too. Does she compartmentalize like Vasquez likely does? Does it bother her to have a hand in this man's death? Does she wrestle with her own feelings on a personal level about this? V and Johnny have some interesting words over life and death. Whether there's an ever after, whether Johnny even thinks about what he is, about V and Johnny's own experience rising from the garbage dump grave. Johnny says he doesn't really think about his status in terms of existence, whether real Johnny is in the afterlife, while he himself could just be an echo. But I do think he does start to wonder and think about this a bit more, following the quest chipping in. I think it does weigh on his mind a lot, should you choose to do those quests, and it does drive Johnny, not unlike Joshua, to try and earn forgiveness. And Johnny even says that he sees a lot of that rebel spirit of his in Joshua. And yeah, it's not necessarily the first thing you'd maybe think, seeing these two characters side by side, but their struggles line up a lot. I also love the detail, though, of Joshua wanting the BD to go with Luke's gospel, not John's, because, as Joshua says, John's version was crude and over the top. It sounds a bit like someone we know. If you consider Johnny's Arasaka Tower op as a crucifixion of sorts, I don't know. Love them or hate them, both Josh and Johnny grew up under harsh circumstances. They're both shitty in a lot of ways and did horrible things. But the odds were against Josh and Johnny and countless others from the start. It's no wonder they did the things they did. It's not an excuse, of course, but when you look at where they came from and the world that they live in, you definitely see how their lives went to shit the way they did. They're both trying to fight an uphill, hopeless battle. Perhaps in a way, trying to forgive themselves. And they both potentially can seek out forgiveness from others, a sort of redemption, experiencing complex regrets for their actions. But of course, forgiveness is not an easy thing to give, and they don't always get what they seek. A day later, V gets a call from Rachel. It's tea time. Sorry, bad joke. But Josh has been asking for V all day, and Rachel needs her star to be focused enough to do this BD right. If Joshua has doubts, or if he's emotionally unstable, or if he's freaking out, that's not going to be the product they want to market. So V arrives at the studio amid a crowd of protesters. Someone in the crowd is reciting scripture. People aren't happy about Joshua's blasphemy, as a number of the signs say. But I'd imagine there's bound to be some people there who are just disturbed at the idea of a death like this being made into a simulation product. Vasquez lets V into the studio and we head to set. But an interesting thing I found on my way there is a conversation outside the main studio between two crew members. One of them is forced to admit to filming a horrific XBD with equipment she borrowed from the studio, while the other blackmails her into giving her the BD. which is unsurprising considering why we're even there in the first place. I'm reminded of that Regina gig where we can take out the father-son duo who creates those horrific XPDs, but we can't quite have the same effect here. This corpo op runs deep. Inside, Rachel directs us to Joshua. Now, Joshua apparently, depending on the dialogue options you choose preceding this moment, can have a lot more doubts than normal. But ultimately, it is up to V to get Joshua ready for his big moment. Or not. V can agree with Joshua's doubts, telling him not to go through with this, but Joshua will say it's too late, he has to see this through. On the other hand, if V wants to make Joshua as comfortable with his death as possible, they can reassure him. What I find Joshua is most moved by, however, is when V sees him in the way that Johnny does, saying that he is a rebel, almost sort of a revolutionary, that it's not the corpse using him, he's using the corpse to spread his message. He seems quite touched by that observation. It does make you ask the question, is it worth doing something if you believe in it so much? Or is it worth determined by how other people will receive what you're doing? Of course, that is a complicated question that I imagine the answer will change depending on context for everybody. Is being true to yourself more important than doing what maybe makes more sense? Personally, I think Joshua needs to see a therapist. I feel for the guy, despite all the shitty things he's done, especially when he tells V how scared he is, but that's unfortunately not an option for him. He's stuck on death row, he has to be executed. I don't think there's actually a way to get Joshua out of this, unless you gun him down at the overpass, but, you know, that ends the quest early. V can pray with Joshua, or not, or just sit with him while he prays out loud. I do quite like V's level of understanding and compassion, depending on how you choose to play V. Because, let's face it, V's killed a lot more people than Joshua has. V's done a lot worse, almost certainly. I think it makes a lot of sense for V towards the end of this story to have a more reflective side, considering they're approaching their own potential doom. You don't have to like Joshua or agree with what he says to see the complexity of what he's going through and how it does connect to V and Johnny, even just terms of feelings. Also, I'd like to point out that the colors in the crucifixion scene are eerily similar to the blue, red, or magenta blue color scheme that we see outside Mikoshi. Mikoshi itself is a mix of reds and blues. And I feel like the color symbolism of Cyberpunk 2077 is a subject for its own video to really dive into it properly, but I don't know, to me that says a lot. There is V, Johnny, Josh, three sides of the same triangle. Joshua asks V to be the one to commence hammer time, but V can say no. V doesn't have to stay to watch even, but for all intents and purposes of this video, V is at least staying to watch. Should V perform the crucifixion, which is wild considering we met this guy 2 days ago, Josh even says how much that says about him, that V is his only friend. Johnny even shows up to say some lines in the case that V is doing the crucifixion. And as we raise the cross, or as the actor who crucifies Joshua otherwise raises the cross, Johnny appears and peers up at Joshua, thoughtful. He almost looks mournful in a way. It really adds a lot to the big moment of this quest. Once it's all done and Joshua's dead, Rachel lights up, sighs, says she's going to bed. V will get paid in a couple days, though they'll get less if they didn't help to soothe Joshua's doubts. And that is that. Ultimately, Joshua is a tragic figure. Yes, he murdered people. And yes, maybe his desire for forgiveness, his holier-than-thou attitude, is less about being genuinely devout and more just about his interest in his own comfort before death. Yeah, he bulldozes through Gloria Elamar's grief, and yes, he's arguably delusional, but he is what his world made him. He is what the cyberpunk world has made all of its characters. He's not very different from V, he just happened to get caught for the crimes he committed. There's no good ending here. I mean, this is cyberpunk. There's never a good ending. There's no right ending. Because the world is exactly the same before and after we start and finish this quest. That's perhaps the sobering part. I think Mike Pondsmith is the one who said this, that Cyberpunk's not about saving the world, it's about saving yourself. And you're left to wonder, well, did Joshua save himself? And I don't mean necessarily in the religious sense, I mean, in the end, did he forgive himself? Again, V's choices throughout the quest can affect that outcome. Throughout the game of 2077 as well, we experience Johnny's own acceptance, depressing though it is, that none of what he really did, none of what he sacrificed, none of the crap he went through really accomplished what he sought. Some might even argue that some of Johnny's choices and actions made things worse. That BD that Joshua dies to create may do more harm than good for all we know. Maybe it won't even make a dent at all. It's just another disturbing BD in a sea of disturbing BDs, most of which are probably even worse than what Fourth Wall has just produced on that particular day. It says a lot that Joshua's BD is probably considered soft-core, but ultimately I doubt it'll accomplish what Joshua hoped it would. It's terribly sad in that sense. Sad that Bill Jablonski was killed the way he was, then scraped off the road by NCPD and swept in the furnace. It's also sad to see Vasquez's regret, which you can actually witness under the overpass. He didn't want to kill Bill Jablonski, but he did. And now this guy who genuinely seems to believe in his work as a police officer has to carry the fact that, yeah, he had to kill this guy for the corpo overlords. Rachel gets her big break, but is it worth it for what it cost her? I wouldn't be shocked if she is taxed emotionally with what her job entails in general. Those little details peppered throughout the quest about meditation, having that smoke, needing a shitload of sleep, says something. Killing a killer doesn't necessarily make this killing any easier on the person pushing the button, on the person in charge of the BD. That Joshua didn't die in an electric chair is small consolation. From what I understand of actual historical crucifixion, it is one of the worst ways to die. The fact that Joshua died when he did is nuts, because I'm pretty sure that those who lined the Appian Way were not so lucky. God, I gotta watch Spartacus again. Zuleika tried to broker forgiveness, but instead, she may have caused even more pain for her mother. You understand why she tried to do what she did. Forgiveness was a big thing for her own peace of mind, for her own sense of letting her grief go. But you can't blame Gloria for not having that forgiveness for Joshua. You can't demand forgiveness or beg for it, I think. I think it's given when that person is ready to give it, if they ever are. But ultimately, though, the saddest part of the whole questline here is how almost faded it feels. This is Night City. This is Cyberpunk. This is humanity. It's a story we've all heard before. Tragic childhood, terrible mistakes, a sad end for all parties involved to varying degrees. Regardless of whether you see Joshua as a delusional, entitled murderer, or a sympathetic figure who genuinely regrets his actions, who was failed by the world around him, or somewhere in between. His story is one that can really make you stop and think about the bigger picture. Thank you for watching the Joshua Stephenson Sinnerman video. This game is full of so many interesting side quests. Even the shortest ones are super interesting, like the guy with the burning dick. I want to cover more side quests, and let me know what other side quests you'd like covered, aside from Phantom Liberty stuff, because that's coming soon too. Man, it's complicated. Because really, it's so easy to be like Joshua's scum of the earth because of what he did, and definitely there's no excuse for the lives he took and the pain he caused. I do really appreciate that the game makes you really think about, well, how did he end up like this? What is the core of Joshua's issues? I really like it, and it makes me appreciate V and Johnny's story more. This one will stick in my head for a while. Thank you so much to members once again. I really appreciate the support. Members, if you were in the same position as Bill Jablonski, I would deliberately fail the mission so you could survive, because that's the only way to save Bill, is to fail the mission. And of course, thank you so much to everybody for watching. Thank you for every like, subscribe, comment. It means a lot. Have a good one, guys, and I will see you again in the next one. Goodbye.